fellow Agilists, welcome to another episode in Season 3 of the Virtually Agile videocast. Today's guest is a product manager and a writer of many articles on Medium who aims to help teams discover better ways of working and avoids that trap of becoming a feature factory. I'm very pleased to welcome Martin. Damn, I've forgotten how to pronounce your last name.
Maarten Dalmijn.
Dalmijn, perfect. It's too tricky for a native English speaker to try and pronounce your Dutch name. I apologize.
That's okay. It happens all the time.
How are you in this spooky season, this October month?
I'm doing really well. Like, it's a busy month. It's getting darker and darker. It's getting colder and wetter. I mean, I'm from the Netherlands. We're kind of like wet swamp people, so it's not the best time of the year.
I'm sure they love that description of themselves, swamp people. So, Martin, some of our listeners perhaps haven't come across your work. So would you please give us a little bit more about yourself and your journey with agility?
Yeah. So basically, I don't have a background in tech. First of all, I studied biology and I have a master in functional genomics, so analysis of genetic data sets. My first job was as a QA, working in a waterfall company. Then there was this one person who was really into Scrum, and he was very fanatic and very enthusiastic, and I kind of got infected by him. So and that's how I started out, basically just reading the Scrum Guide, reading books, of course, from the big names like Mike Cohn and Gunther Verheijen. And slowly I started writing. And of course, in the beginning, my articles weren't that great, but I did my best, of course. And I kept doing it. And I actually slowly moved from writing about Scrum and Agile more into product management, because that's where I want to aim it to bridge this gap, because I think there's a lot of writing on Scrum and Agile, a lot of writing on product management. The intersection of those two is not as popular, and I don't even know why, but that's at least what I observe.
Well, enter you. Yeah. This is where your niche then lies. Now, I mentioned it's spooky season. It is Halloween, and to listeners of the show, I believe you're going to tell us a bit of a horror story about product management and road mapping.
Yeah, I can tell you a horror story. So I was working, I'm not going to tell a lot of details about the company, but I was working at this company, and every quarter we did road mapping. And it was a gruesome endeavor where we literally would talk for weeks about our roadmaps. And then this culminated in a single day where I actually would show up at the office with 10 other product owners, and we would talk about the roadmap the whole day. And the roadmap had all kinds of rules, like colors for indicating dependencies, business cases. The whole day we would spend talking and grilling each other about it, and then it wouldn't be done. No. Then afterwards, I would have another meeting alone with the CEO, the domain owner, and the CTO, where I would get grilled again. Like, why did you prioritize it this way? What if we change the order? And then after this whole circus, as I call it, right? Then the roadmaps were stashed away, and nobody looked at them anymore unless somebody acted like they were important again. For example, you found out, oh, I need help from another team. Is it on the roadmap? Great, they're going to help me. Is it not on the roadmap? Oh, I've got a problem. How can we do this without needing help from another team? So that's kind of the biggest horror story I've ever encountered.
I would probably guess that isn't a story that's unfamiliar to others. I've worked with companies before, and I remember a similar situation. A CEO, he would be in the town halls and he would say, hey, if it's not on the plan for this next 2 years, it's not getting done, whilst also trying to profess that they are an agile company. Yeah. Does amuse. So I think, many people have probably experienced that exact scenario.
Correct. No, I believe so too. So today I gave a talk about it, Mind the Product, and actually I was surprised by how familiar it was with other product owners and product managers. So I expect some people, but literally everybody said, yeah, I have lived that. And even some people were saying, I'm living it right now, right? And even worse.
So you mentioned this talk you gave today. I think it was something around taming the road mapping circus.
Yes.
So what are some of the key takeaways from that talk? What could product managers or product owners experiencing some of these challenges with a road mapping circus, what could they do to try and improve that situation?
So I think the most important relation for me was, so when I started out as a product owner, right, I was thinking delivering a feature is equal to delivering value. We can meet all the timelines. We just need to work together longer and get better. So all those mistakes or all those beliefs, let's just say, that I later found out were incorrect, had them as well. So I think the biggest epiphany for me, at least, is that you need to engage with your stakeholders on this level, because roadmaps have a dual function. On the one hand, it's for stakeholders and yeah, business people, like people to understand what are you going to be working on, all right? On the other hand, it's a living artifact used by different teams to see, hey, this is the road ahead based on our current understanding. And you need to serve both these audiences, but they have different mindsets. And unless you bring them closer together, you're always going to have friction, either with your stakeholders because they don't get it, right? Why don't we have timelines? Why isn't it a Gantt chart? Do you guys know what you're doing? Or the developers who are saying, why is this a Gantt chart? Do you know what you're doing? Like, it doesn't work that way. We don't know it will take 3 months. We have no clue. We don't have enough information. So this, I think, is a very fundamental thing it's important to be aware of.
I completely agree where you say it's a living document. We
Yeah.
we roadmap things because inevitably it's based on what you know at that point in time, right? This is the current prioritized list of things we know we're focusing on. But a few weeks' time from now, we may learn based on starting work on something that had some unknowns around it that actually is a lot more complex to deliver, and therefore that may reduce its priority and may shift it further back the roadmap or off the roadmap at all. You may find something brand new that needs to come in ahead of something on the roadmap, and that changes things as well. I think, as you say, this focus on feature equals value, or even another similar one, velocity equals value. It's quite
Oh yeah.
quite damaging. We
Yeah.
see that out there a lot as well, right?
Yeah, and I think what's very important is you need to, yeah. So this is saying, I don't know from who it is, but you need to meet your stakeholders where they are, not where you want them to be, right?
Mm.
So you need to build a relationship with them, understand their world, understand their interests, and then you need to show your perspective. So to give a concrete example, I was working on building a planning module at a company, and we built it in a different way than a customer wanted. A Google Calendar, right? Where you could plan everything from 1 to 2, and uh, basically, if we would have just done what they wanted, that would have meant redesigning the whole planning module.
Mm.
So I just called them and said, "Can you explain to me how you work? Like, just walk me through. You have a budget, you plan a project. How do you do your job?" And then as I found out how they worked, I actually found out that they don't need a calendar. They don't need to plan. Their main problem is I want someone needs to know when they start and when it should be finished. And as well, I want to be able to prioritize so they know what's the most important thing, maybe due to dependencies. And that's, I think, the biggest danger. Like, if you're not aware of this and you think, do this feature and then life is great, then you're going to be missing out and you're going to build a lot of invaluable stuff. And this I explained, like, to the whole company. This example, you just say, like, hey, don't talk about features. You need to dig deeper to understand what they are trying to achieve, because otherwise we'll build something and we have no clue whether it will meet their needs.
Mm. The outcome behind what you're working on, so important to align around, yeah, how you can potentially achieve that, because this is what I often say, it comes down to autonomy with the team as well. I would rather encourage people to be describing things in terms of the problem to be solved or the outcome they're desiring, rather than a solution, because there could be 10 ways to solve a problem, and the experts who are actually doing the work on the ground, they probably know the best way of doing it, and they could be suggesting, well, here's this way and this is why. And as a consequence of understanding the outcome behind it, they're more likely to produce a better outcome, the better result that adds value. Now, I want to touch a bit more on the value side of things, given that we've reflected on features don't equal value. Are there any techniques that you would recommend to anyone in terms of helping reinforce a focus on value, and ensuring that you are measuring value of the work you're doing over time and taking that into account when creating roadmaps and prioritizing?
Yeah. So what I think is really important is you need to do discovery. So what you see is a lot of Scrum teams, they're really focused on delivery, but there's a step before that. Like, just talk to a customer, just ask them to, like, can you show me how you're working at the moment. What are your challenges? What are your pain points? What takes the most time? What, like, just see them how they currently do it, and that gives you so much insights. And if you just jump to conclusions, that's easy, but it's also very risky. So I think that's the first step. Like, you need to really understand what is value. And to give you a concrete example, like, there's a very famous quote: people don't want a quarter inch drilled in, they want a hole, right? But actually that isn't true. Like, that you don't go far enough. Like, they don't want a hole, they want to hang that painting,
Mm.
or they want to have this nice cupboard, like with books for their kid. And it's about how does it make them feel when they see their kid take the books out of the shelf themselves, and they feel proud because their daughter can do that. And there's less clutter in the room, that also makes them feel good. These are things that people want. Like, they don't want this whole, like, they don't care about it, they care about, that's also, so I think that's the difficult part. You need to really, like, peel away these layers. And the best technique I've seen is jobs to be done interviewing. But I do want to say is, I'm not an expert on jobs to be done interviewing. Like,
Okay.
there are many podcasts explain how to do it, and it's super fascinating, because basically what's very counterintuitive to me, and they also say that it's very uncomfortable, is that you need to interview people and really ask them, what were you doing at that moment? Like, go into all the details, and then you can find out what was really happening. And that's because people, they always, when you ask them a question, they can come up with a rational explanation, but that is not what necessarily what happened. And if
Mm.
you force to just them to tell what's going on, then you'll get way more information, and then you can find the truth, because what people tell you isn't always really what happened.
It reminds me of the kind of Japanese concept of gemba walks, going to where the value is and experiencing it live in person. Seeing actually how someone is doing something out in the field, whatever that may be. And I know it can be tricky sometimes with software and virtual mediums, and just by the virtue of someone watching someone else as they're performing something means that they may behave certain slightly differently. But completely to your point, if you get someone to explain exactly why they've clicked that button. I've experienced this myself. I did a bit of product research for a platform called Butter, who are looking to create a facilitation platform. I've used this fairly extensively, and they were doing exactly that. They're asking, why did you click there? What were you? What did that button make you think was going to happen, and that sort of thing. So I think absolutely that sort of approach can help you really drill down to the crux of the problem and understand what the customer wants, what they were desiring, what behavior they were exhibiting, and that can, I believe, result in a better quality product. I think the other thing I wanted to mention is that there is so much benefit in having your teams anchored to customers. The Agile Manifesto itself talks about customer centricity, then putting the customer first. But then how many metrics are there out there that we use that are all about productivity and work in progress and so on and so forth? How many are actually about how often we engage with customers? So I personally subscribe to one called Days Since Last User Engagement that tries to keep that number of days as low as possible, so that you're frequently interacting, you're frequently anchored to what the customer's looking for, and you're more likely to produce something that they want, that's going to work, and that's going to be valuable to them.
I completely agree. I'm also not in the camp of maximizing flow efficiency, because what you see is you're just so focused on delivery, right? But if you talk to a customer, where do you need? Is there a Spring Backlog item for that? Often not, right? Or, like, you understand what I mean? Like, uh, I'm not in the camp of delivery, 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 right? Like, spend enough time understanding what you're trying to achieve. That's way more valuable, and otherwise you probably will deliver more features. But as I think it's like, I forgot the name, Dieter Rams, very famous designer who inspired Apple. He says weniger aber besser, so less but better. I think that's what you should be aiming for, and that's the most difficult thing to do, because you need to remove. And if you remove something, like, as much as possible, it means you need to have a very deep understanding of what you're doing. And if you don't, you cannot do that, because everything feels important.
And it resonates back to the Agile Manifesto principle, right? Simplicity, maximize the amount of work not done. Just we don't want to just churn out features that don't add value. Actually, there's a lot of movement I've been seeing out there about removing features because they're essentially waste. They're not being used. They're just there that someone's built, and essentially they're debt in the system that you've created that aren't being used. So yeah, I think
Yeah,
value
you're
focus.
absolutely
There's
right.
a lot to be said for it. Now, what are your
And I
thoughts
think
on deadlines? I'm very intrigued. Where do they fit in your world with regards to road mapping, development of things, stuff being produced?
um, so. How do you say, I'm not going to say you should never set deadlines, right? I've also done it. I've actually done it recently, but I do think it's an instrument you need to be aware of that you shouldn't be using constantly, right?
Mm.
So if there is a case where there is a sense of urgency and a sense of importance, like you can set a deadline, but I much prefer working at a sustainable pace, because the problem is, if you focus, if you put pressure on everyone to deliver, that means teams are not going to help each other out, right? Because everybody looks at their velocity chart and they're like, yeah, I'm not going to help you. So all this deadline focus that really just minimizes collaboration in my experience, because everybody's just focused on, okay, I've got this project. If I meet this deadline, I will get like my manager will be happy, and if I don't, I get punished. And yeah, that really causes problems. So what I try to do is, for example, let's say I need to deliver something which is pretty big, then I try to scope down as a first version, which is over a more reasonable time frame, probably something like 2 to 6 weeks, right? Not more. And then I will say, in 6 weeks or in 4 weeks, we will deliver this. And then when it's done, we'll have more information to give a forecast for the rest. And then
Mm.
it will be way more realistic. It still won't be perfect, but I really talk of it in terms of a forecast, because it's based on the current understanding. And if you keep talking about as deadlines, or you make a deadline of 3 months, you won't make it. Everybody will be frustrated, even though they're working as hard as they can. And they're just like, there's a fog of beforehand, like you're limited by what you can know before starting. And there's nothing you can do that can remove that unless you start, right? And that's, I think, is the key thing. And then you can set a more realistic deadline or timeline if you would need to do that.
And that is exactly the word that I personally encourage teams, companies to adopt, and it's forecasts rather than deadlines. It's we forecast based on, again, the knowledge we have at the time, based on our current situation, that this is when something will be ready. And we can't guarantee it. It's not a commitment as such, but we will we will maintain transparency and keep you abreast as how things progress. And as you were saying there, having kind of a nearer term planning horizon based on what you know, and it might be rough and raw, but it's something, is for me a far better thing than going, right, we're going to commit to the next 9 months of work, and there's lots of unknowns around it, and it's going to force everyone to feel pressured and so on and so forth. There's so many scenarios I can think of where a project manager or someone has come and said, we need to have a deadline for this and we're going to set it, and we don't know everything up front, and it compresses things, and yeah, there's frustration involved. So yeah, I'm a big fan of using the word forecast or estimates rather than deadlines personally. But I can appreciate why having a line in the sand, just as a date, can help with Focus things. There is it's a Parkinson's law. It says work will expand to fill the time available. Right? If you've got 6 months to do something and it can be done in three, you probably still do it in six because you just add more and more things to it. So I think there is something to be said by having a date in mind, just something to focus everyone, to align everyone around. But I definitely don't feel they should be longer than kind of that, yeah, 6 to 12 weeks time frame. I personally feel that SAFE has their planning horizons, their PI planning. You plan an increment at a time. To me, that's kind of the maximum I recommend any sort of planning to be done. But even then, the outcome of a product increment or product increment planning is still a draft plan based on what you know at the time, and it is subject to change based on basic agile principles of inspecting and adapting and learning.
Yeah,
Sounds
you're
like we
totally
are
right.
aligned there. So there is another circus out there that I'm a fan of debating, and it's the certification one. I know you've shared some content
Oh,
around this also, so it's probably going to be an interesting one. What are your thoughts on agile certifications and the wealth of them that are out there at the moment?
yeah. So here's my honest opinion. So they're fulfilling a need, right? In the sense that there are a lot of inexperienced people out there that want to have a badge to show I'm capable. I mean, I have to be honest, right? I also suffered more from that when I had less experience, right? So you're like, yeah, I understand Scrum, and you want something to prove it, to wave around. I think a lot of people do certifications because companies love certifications. They ask for it. It's easy to judge, right? Tick the box. We ask for a PSM2 or a CSM, whatever. And yeah, I can also tell you this is also a true story, right? I mean, so there's this influence principle from CLDNI. It's called authority, right? Certification is a way of signaling I have a certain amount of knowledge. People are super sensitive for that, and companies are super sensitive for that. Because I was actually applying as a job for my first job as a product owner, and I got rejected. I don't know, like probably like 50 times. And then back then, the certification world was not as big as it is now, right? So I put on the top of my resume, this is the only thing I've changed. I'm not joking. Certified product owner, and I didn't have the job of the product owner. I was a business analyst, and suddenly I was invited to 70% of the interviews. I'm not kidding, from 0 to 70%, one line change in the resume. So yeah, but of course now the situation is different. I think it is devaluated a bit. Like it's not as special anymore as it was back then.
I've been through a similar experience. I remember almost wanting to collect as many as possible, thinking that if I knew or if I had all these certifications, then I would somehow be better at what I do. I remember doing a bit of a talk about the commoditization of agile certifications. And I use SAFE as an example just because they have a lot of them. And it was something I remember recounting. If I collected them all like I was a Pokemon master, I would sound like Daenerys Targaryen, like Game of Thrones. I would sound like Mother of Dragons, Breaker of Chains, first of her name, etc., because it'd be SPC, SP, yeah, etc. I could reel them all off. And I think to your point, it's kind of it's related to industry demands and kind of you almost have to play the game a little bit just to be considered
Yeah.
sometimes. When I was earlier in my career, I couldn't get an interview unless I had Prince 2 related to project management. Yeah, it would be difficult to be considered for a Scrum Master if you didn't have a Scrum Master certification. So there's almost amount of you kind of got to play the game a little bit to do it. But I think, and many people tend to agree with this, a 2 day course does not make you great at what you do. Yeah, there are far more
No.
underlying skills and competences that you could have beyond just one of those 2 day courses. And this is why I'm a fan of kind of the longitudinal learning. So there are some great companies out there that do kind of courses over longer periods of time that bake in continued learning, that have cohorts of people that work together to share knowledge and experience. And I'm far more a believer in that approach than just churn out as many certified people as possible.
So I don't want to plug someone, but Sjoerd Nijland is doing the Road to Mastery and with cohorts of people. And I think he's especially doing it for this exact same reason as you're saying, like actually collaborating regularly with people to get them to level up, and not just about the theory, but how do you really uh, should act as a scrum master, because a lot of it isn't just about what you know. Like it's about I think a large bottleneck is how can you influence others and get them to understand better why agile and scrum, why it is the way it is. And that's all about communication, influencing skills, situational leadership. And that's not something you will get from a 2 day course. That's something you need to practice over longer periods of times, and even then you won't be perfect at it. It's very, very difficult.
Completely. And again, not to plug anyone else, but I know Tobias Mayer does something similar with his certified Scrum
Yeah.
Master course. It's longitudinal over multiple evenings, over multiple weeks, and I think that definitely helps with bedding in knowledge and transferring that, and hopefully building some skills and learnings along the way. So it's a shame to see there is so much certification out there, but it just demonstrates how widely used Agile now is. It's a great thing. I remember having this conversation with Mike Conan, one of the first guests on the podcast. He was saying he would love it if Agile was no longer talked about as a thing. It was just what we did. It was just how we worked because we recognized the benefits it brought. So it stopped becoming we're going to do this Agile transformation or we are Agile. We just did it. That's just how we did things.
No, I think that's a really brilliant way of looking at it. And I was actually thinking today, because I gave this presentation on road mapping, I think a lot of it has to do with our education, right? Complex domain. Like we always during university with our studies, we learn read the book, then you do the test, you get 100%. And that's kind of like what continues, right? As well. Like in many university studies, we're like, okay, you can study this and then you know everything. But yeah, in complex work, the problem is you don't know everything. That's the problem. And how do you deal with that? And there's no way of knowing everything until you start doing the work. And that's, I think that's such a different mindset. It doesn't come naturally to us. And we also want to be perfect. We don't want to make mistakes. Well, when you do complex work, you're going to make mistakes. You will always make mistakes. And I think this is something maybe our education system should teach us more about this, but like, because it's not that obvious or natural, I think.
I completely agree. I remember having this conversation with a number of agile practitioners sometime last year about how wouldn't it be great if just some of the principles around agile were taught at younger ages. If you were taught to embrace an experimentation mindset, failure as not being a dirty word but a learning opportunity. If you were taught that a lot younger, there'd probably be a lot less stigma and pressure on youngsters growing up for having to do everything perfect the first time, because it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to learn. I often say, don't fail fast, just learn fast. Failure is this. It's still a stigmatized word that certain demographics hate. Leadership don't like the idea of failing because it's seen to reflect poorly on them, and they're worried about what it means. But if we create an environment where people can feel comfortable learning, experimenting, making mistakes, adjusting as they. I don't care if you make a mistake. All I care is that you learn from it and that you adjust your approach accordingly and try and avoid that same mistake happening again. So
Okay, so
build.
what camp are you? What do you think failure is a dirty word, or you
No,
think it's okay to
I
use?
I used to. I used to think failure was awful, and I used to judge myself for making mistakes and messing up, and now it's just okay. It happened. It happened because of a
Yeah,
reason. Either it was unknown, or I didn't try my hardest, or there's probably multiple reasons for it, but it happened. So move on. You can't change the past. You cannot change the past. So all you can do is focus on the future. All you can do is focus on the things that are within your influence. The sphere of your influence.
yeah,
Do something different next time.
you're absolutely right.
And then I quote this so often. Einstein's definition of insanity: doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So it's the same thing. And this is
Yeah,
how I encourage teams to change, to retrospect, to do things differently. Because if they're unhappy with their current reality, they need to do something differently. They need to try something new, learn from how it goes. If it doesn't go great, okay, let's try something different. What could we tweak? Or if it is going great, can we amplify that and take that even further?
I think you're spot on. And one thing I also see, just to add to that, is you see when there's a problem, people always think and they come up with a complicated solution or not as simple as it can be. And I'm always like, let's try the simplest thing that could work,
Mm.
because then we gain more information. And then we can always make it more complicated. The problem is if you start complicated, you're not going to make it simple. We just don't remove things. And then you also know whatever you add, you really need, because it failed. Like there is value in failing, right? Because whatever you then add to make it succeed, that is really necessary. And I think a lot of teams skip this, where they're just debating, should we do this and that, and they come with a perfect solution on paper. But the reality is they suffer from premature optimization, and they didn't come up with the best solution, but it works, so they feel like it is an amazing solution.
Yeah, they've allowed perfects to be the enemy of good, right? You could
Yes.
take a movement in the right direction. And this again, it's all I'm looking to do when I'm trying to help teams. I'm not saying be perfect agile. Who even knows what that is? It varies depending on your circumstances anyway. But here is ideal. Here is a great agile team, and here's where you are now. You're not going to suddenly become that overnight. But if you take small steps in the right direction, the law of marginal gains, right? What Sky did in 2010, where they just made tiny improvements to lots of little different facets, and over time that aggregated to create a great team that won multiple things. It's the same thing. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Don't gold plate everything. Just take small steps in the right direction, and it comes back to how I'm doing retrospectives to say, right, from this retrospective, all we're looking to do is try and find, I don't know, anything between 2 and 5 new things to do differently that are hopefully going to improve things. And in a few weeks' time, we'll see how they went, and maybe we'll try some more marginal gains,
Yeah.
slight improvements. That's all it takes.
Well, I always explain it with so there was this person that traded a red paperclip for a house, and you would say that's impossible. But that's because he didn't trade it immediately for the house. He traded for a ballpoint pen, and then for a small toy car, etc., etc., and ultimately he had a house. And that's basically every trade made the adjacent possible different, like what was possible. And yeah, that's exactly as you're saying. Like every step illuminates a new path on the stairway, right? That you couldn't see before on this winding stairway.
Absolutely. Now, the theme I mentioned to you, the theme of this podcast is all about hearing from established thought leaders, but also from newer voices that are doing great stuff out there that perhaps aren't being heard. So, is there anyone you feel that I perhaps should reach out to and get involved in the show, or that perhaps some of the listeners should take a look at, who should look into the sorts of work that they're doing?
Yeah. So let me think about that. So I feel like Sjoerd Nijland is doing a lot of interesting stuff with his Road to Mastery, and I don't think he's on a lot of podcasts, but I could be wrong. And I think it's a shame because he is carving his own path. He's not part of the big certification bodies, right? And I think that's something he represents a different perspective. So I would say Sjoerd and yeah, Willem and Ageling as well. I mean, they're founders of Serious Scrum, so people know them. But I think they are doing interesting stuff. They're not affiliated heavily with any certification body. They're trying to be independent, and I really like that.
Sounds great. I'll reach out to them. Now, Martin, I always ask anyone who appears on my show to add a new theme to my retro backlog. So, what if you could add anything to any? If you could inspire me in any way to create a brand new retrospective around anything you wish, the world is your oyster. What would it be?
Gremlins.
Gremlins. Love that show. That movie. Oh my god, Gremlins 1 or 2 doesn't matter. Both of them. I'll do a combination. Right, Mogwai.
The first one is the best one, I think, but the second
The
one
one the
also
one at
has its
Winter.
charm.
The only one the bit I really like about the second one is where you've got the Frank Sinatra female. It's like a Frank Sinatra
Yeah.
one and a female one, because they've morphed in that lab and got a bit crazy. Yeah, I can definitely. I think I did actually start a Gremlins theme one last year. I just didn't get around to finishing it. This was part of I did an Agile Advent calendar last year and just started releasing lots of Christmas ones. So I got around to doing Die Hard and Home Alone and Elf and various other ones. I just didn't quite get to Gremlins. So I will definitely do it. It's Christmas is coming up, so it feels like it's time. Gremlins, the retrospective. Nice.
Yeah. So, Chris, the reason you want to know why I said Gremlins, because
Please do.
you've done
Tell me.
so much, so many of them. I was thinking I need to come up with something you didn't do, and it turns out you're already working on it. So I was like, damn,
No, but
you really
it's
made
not
me
out
of
yet.
them.
It's not out yet. So you've now elevated a little bit further up the backlog based on demand. Demand is there now. So immediately my mind thinks to what's in terms of risk, what is the equivalent of us getting wet, or what is what's like our eating after midnight, what's going to turn us into a gremlin? I don't know. My mind will go somewhere.
There's a lot of directions you can go in there. Yeah, opportunity, gizmo, right? I guess, or something.
Yeah, like
Gizmo
it.
with a crossbow.
Gizmo with his little
And the Rambo
fabricated
thing.
but yeah, love it. I'm gonna have to watch that soon again now. Right, it's been great hosting you on the show, Martin. Really appreciate you coming and sharing your thoughts and your wisdom around product management. Is there any final comments you'd like to make, or any final things you'd like to share with the listeners today?
Spend time with your customers and your stakeholders, right? That I think those two things we need to do more. And stakeholders are not your enemies; they just have different interests. And the better you understand them, the better you can get everyone on the same page in the same boat. So those are the two things which I say, like, don't obsess over all these Scrum mechanics. They're not unimportant, but if you put garbage in, garbage is going to be coming out. So really, those two things deserve more attention.
Excellent. Thank you for that. That was the end of the episode with Martin. We're always looking for new guests to appear on the show, so do reach out if you'd like to be involved. And as always, folks, don't stop believing.